What is going on, my coffee and cream connoisseurs? This is Matt and Jake coming to you right now before this episode drops. Just want to let you guys know about a couple of things. First and foremost, this is such an exciting episode for us. We have been working on this episode for, about a month now?
Yeah,
about a month of trying to get this put out to you guys. And the reason why we spend so much time on it is because the content is so good. In fact, it is so good, we actually had to break it up into two parts. So this episode you're about to listen to right now is part one, and then part two will drop next week.
We also wanted to clue you guys into a couple other things as well. So we actually had some technical difficulties when we were setting up this episode. So we actually lost the in-studio audio from our mics, but God was so good and he provided us our camera audio that we were able to capture and Josh's audio as well from his end. So we were able to piece together this episode, but it might not sound like what you're used to for coffee and cream. So keep that in mind as you're listening to this episode. Our amazing audio engineer David was able to go in and clean it up as best as he possibly could. So we're bringing this to you guys as best as we possibly can for coffee and cream. We also want to let you guys know that there are some side conversations happening behind the scenes from both of the audio ends. That was just something we couldn't avoid. So just be on the lookout for that as you're listening to this episode. So without further ado, here's today's episode. Welcome back to Coffee and Cream, a podcast where we are changing the narrative one cup of coffee at a time. That's good, synchronization. We're like a swim team.
We're getting there, man.
My name is Jake, and I'm here with Matt.
What is going on, my brother?
Not a whole lot, man. You know, we're drinking coffee. It's a nice Saturday.
Yeah.
Fall is finally here.
Yeah.
You're not a fall person?
I'm not a fall person. I believe in redemption.
I am eager to maintain unity by the Spirit. I love fall.
No, I'm a summer guy all the way through.
Oh my gosh. Have you seen the meme where it's Humpty Dumpty had a great fall and it's pictures of Humpty Dumpty like
yes,
drinking
a
pumpkin spice latte?
That is not
walking.
me.
Man, I love that. That's like peak meme for me.
The only thing good about fall is that Thanksgiving, and Thanksgiving is actually my favorite holiday. Tied with Christmas, because Thanksgiving is prelude to Christmas for me.
That's good. That's good. Think about the spiritual implications behind fall. You know, the fall. Fall.
Yeah.
Gospel things you could do with that right there.
Yeah, it's the beginning of winter, and we're looking for Aslan to come in the spring. I'm just saying.
All right. So
I'm done.
All right, we're good. So we're drinking coffee. This is Obvious Coffee and Cream Podcast. We want to give a huge shout out to one of the best sponsors ever.
Been rocking with us day one.
Been rocking with us since day one. Switch Coffee. These guys have been with us through thick and thin. These guys are awesome. You can check them out at switchcoffee.co. We're drinking their brew right now. These guys are awesome. And we really need to have them on the podcast to talk through their mission, kind of what's going on in St. Louis, and how they're creating opportunities for the marginalized here in St. Louis. They're doing an amazing job here in St. Louis.
Yeah.
So you can go to their website at switchcoffee.co. Use our promo code Coffee and Cream to get 10% off your next order. Also want to give a huge shout out to JM Films. Check them out at jmfilms.com. If your business or organization needs video marketing that gets results, gets them, be sure to contact JM Films. Our final sponsor for this month is Crossway.
What?
Check them out at crossway.org. We got some excellent books.
Bro.
We got some awesome books.
Oh, one of the books we're reading right now. I almost threw across the room. It was so good.
Oh,
so you better stop.
Same. I almost threw it at someone because you need this more than I. It was great. Yeah, no, so check them out at crossway.org for all of your gospel-centered resources. So, man, I'm excited about this episode.
Yeah, bro.
Let's just go ahead and get rolling with it. We have a guest on who is going to just expound for us a little bit more about a pretty controversial topic. We have none other than Pastor Josh Buice. How you doing, man?
Doing well. Good to be with you guys.
Awesome. So I feel like most of our listeners may not know who you are, may not have a familiarity with kind of what you do on a day-to-day basis. So kind of give our audience, tell us a little bit about who you are, your work, your churches, your family, everything.
Yeah, so basically I'm a husband, I'm a father, a pastor to a local church. I have the privilege to serve the church where I grew up as a boy. So the church is 176 years old, just west of Atlanta, Georgia. And my wife and I grew up here as children. I went away to Southern Seminary to study and ended up pastoring out of state for about 7 years. And in God's providence, we ended up being called back here to serve in the very context from where we grew up as children. So I have the privilege to serve as pastor to my father, my mom, my stepmom, my grandmother, my in-laws. So it's been a blast. It's just a wonderful thrill to be able to serve the people who served us as children. So that's what I do on a day-to-day basis: study the Bible, preach the Word. I founded the G3 conference.
Talk to us a little bit about that. What is the G3 conference? What does it stand for? And kind of give us a plug for what's happening next year with it.
Yeah. So G3 conference is a theology conference. So we have each January we assemble in the city of Atlanta, and we have a specific theme that we try to roll out or to expound or to work beneath that umbrella, so to speak. And so what we decided to do was some 7 years ago, we wanted to have a theology conference here in our local church for area churches to come to. So we thought we'd have maybe a few hundred people that would come. And that first year, about 750 people that they registered for the conference. There was a waiting list established. And so we thought, well, this is quite odd. So we had to shut down registration in December, a month before the conference. Turns out college students were sleeping in their cars in the parking lot in January, and I was like, no, you can't do that. You have to come to my home and sleep there. And so really we just kind of stepped back and looked at what we intended to be just a local theology conference to help area churches. When we saw where the attendees were coming from, literally all over the United States and outside of the United States, and we saw that year number one, the Lord really just turned it into a national conference. So for the first 4 years, we would sell out early, establish a waiting list, and year number 5 was 2017, so we decided to step out and kind of go outside of our comfort zone, so to speak, and we moved to a conference center in Atlanta where we went from 700 plus our own church members who were serving in the conference to 2,500 the first year. And so the second year at the convention center, we had right at 3,000. And this year we're expecting somewhere upwards of 4,000 to 5,000. So, so the Lord has really done all of this. And when people, send me emails and they're like, hey, can we grab pizza or grab coffee and sit and talk about, how this whole conference thing works? I figured out the first couple of years that they were really trying to look for the secret sauce. They were looking for the secret blueprint formula, and I just had to start sending back emails stating, look, I don't know how to build a conference. All I know is that we prayed, God did it, and if you pray, God could do it again. So that's really the way the G3 works. This coming year is going to be, the focus is going to be missions. So the mission of God, a biblical understanding of missions. And we're going to be trying to drive home a heavy emphasis. One of the things we like to do in the G3 is put a real heavy emphasis on the local church. And so what we want to do is we want to point people to see and direct them to understand that doing missions, whether it be local missions or whether it be church planting North America or, overseas someplace, it's not that we turn over that work to a parachurch ministry, but we actually should be engaged as a local church in that very process. So parachurch is come alongside the church to help the church, right?
Yeah.
And we think that sometimes it can be so unhealthy the way that parachurch ministries and local churches partner together. Almost it's like the tail's wagging the dog in many cases.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. You have a great lineup of speakers coming: John Piper, David Platt, Phil Johnson, yourself as well, speaking at that conference. So that's going to be an amazing conference, man. I would advise everyone to check it out. What's the URL for that?
G3conference.com.
G3conference.com. I guess tickets are still on sale for it?
Yeah. So we have plenty of room still. Things start to get a little bit interesting towards late fall. So, it would be good to register as early as possible. And then there's also hotel properties on that website as well if you're interested in reserving a hotel as well.
Great. And that date's in January, correct? What's the specific date for the conference?
17th through the 19th of January will be the English conference, but we started last year doing a Spanish conference the day prior. So this will be the second annual Spanish conference. So looking forward to that as well.
Wow. That's incredible. That's amazing how God has blessed that ministry and the conference. And man, we're praying that it continues to bless people. Kind of moving on. So I saw in your Twitter bio that you are a coffee drinker. You love a good dark roast. What is there any coffee shops down in Georgia you like to visit? What are some recos you got for us?
Oh man, we have a local coffee shop that's pretty good here in Douglasville, which is just west of Atlanta. I tend to spend a lot of my time at Starbucks. I know there's a lot of Starbucks haters out there and that kind of thing, but I do like Starbucks coffee. Today I'm drinking Caribou. So, but I have a Ninja, Coffee Ninja at home, and I really enjoy that machine. It really puts out a good brew and allows me to try to explore and make my own version of the flat white at home. So I enjoy that.
I thought it's
about Ninja makes a coffee maker.
Is it like an actual ninja who like is cutting up the beans and frying them for you? Or is this like
No, it's a machine. So it's like a coffee maker, but it's called the Coffee Ninja, if I'm not mistaken. And it's a really cool little machine. It does a few different tricks, and in the afternoons, sometimes if I'm at home and watching college football, I'll try to explore and try to make a little flat white or something like that.
Okay.
The hardest part of though is probably finding it because it's a ninja.
The ninjas, man, they can't find them everywhere.
That's a dad joke. I'm gonna be a dad soon, so I gotta hurry up and get them out.
Oh
quickly.
yeah, in case the audience didn't hear that, Jake's about to be a dad for the first time.
Yeah.
I'm good with all the dad jokes.
Yeah.
Boom. Perfect.
You gotta send them something. Get them ready. You gotta get ready.
Yeah, I'll take notes throughout. Oh my gosh. Okay. So before we dive into kind of our topic today, I want to kind of read. I'm going to read Ephesians 4. I'll just read as the Spirit leads, but I got a couple of verses in mind. But I'll just kind of go through this real quick, and then we'll dive into our topic for today. So Paul writes in the letter to the Ephesians, he writes in chapter 4, verse 1, I, therefore, a prisoner of the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope that it belonged to your call. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. So we're going to be talking today about the social justice statement. To give a little background behind it, and Josh, you can correct me if I totally go off course, but early September, a statement was dropped, and basically the internet exploded. Evangelical internet exploded. You can check, actually first, guys, before we even dive into this episode, pause this and go to the statement on socialjustice.com. I think that's the URL, so I think it's, statementonsocialjustice.com. It is a statement that includes 14 affirmations and denials over various topics: scripture, racism, gender, sexuality, all those things. But specifically, it's trying to address the issue of social justice and how it relates, if it relates at all, to the gospel. And you had a lot of faithful ministers, including yourself, Josh, who helped craft the statement, but you also had men like John MacArthur, Bodie Baucham, James White, people that you and I have listened to for years.
Yeah.
Who have been influential for us. I mean, we've talked about James White and the Thabiti and Wheelie kerfuffle that happened a couple months ago.
Yeah.
Just how influential James White has been for us as well in terms of apologetics and those areas as well. But you also had other signers as well, like Dwayne. Looking at you, Dwayne. Gotta call him out.
Yeah, do it. We love you, bro.
We love you, great. Chris Larson, president of Ligonier Ministries, as well as a few others, and I think about 9,700 other signatories for this. But it kind of goes through different things, and it caused a kerfuffle. A little bit of a kerfuffle.
Using these words these past few episodes, man.
It's my word, man. It's my word of the month. Leave me alone. But we kind of wanted to have someone. So the reason why we waited we didn't want to drop an episode
Yeah.
super quickly because it was fresh for us.
Yeah.
And we were trying to understand it and comprehend it as well. And so we didn't want to throw our voices out there because everybody else did one.
Yeah.
You know, you had Russell Moore do one, Doctrine and Devotion did one. Just kind of going through and diving into social justice itself. And we didn't want to add to the noise.
No,
and we wanted to take down to comprehend it ourselves. But one thing I think I noticed over the course of a couple months as it's dropped and people are kind of understanding it and kind of signing it as well, that there isn't a lot of cross discussion about it.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing a lot of people who disagree with each other coming together to do it. If there is, please send me some, because I want to listen and hear kind of what other people are saying.
Yeah,
Doctrine and Devotion did a great one with Tom Askell. I'll link to that in the show notes. That was a really great one. But we haven't seen a lot of that.
Yeah.
And I think the kind of the emphasis that we wanted to take, the posture we wanted to take is, man, we want to hear from someone who was influential in getting this thing started.
Yeah.
Someone who is a founder of this, someone who kind of helped propel and get people in the same room together. The room where it happens. Hamilton? No?
No, bro. I don't have time to watch plays.
Oh, it's not a play. It's a soundtrack. It's on Spotify.
I ain't got time for that either. Look. Listen. We're about the social justice, not about Hamilton. I can't do it. I can't follow Hamilton.
There's a connection there somewhere.
I can't. I got time for it, man.
That's fine. So, yeah, throw me off my game now. Anyway, whatever. So, our kind of our emphasis and our posture was we wanted to get someone on who disagreed with us.
Yeah.
And just be upfront with you, Josh. Like Matt and I, we disagree with the statement. We agree with most of it, and we agree with a lot of the things that are written in the statements. But we have some questions about it. And as of right now, I don't think Matt and I have any intention of signing it. Just to be upfront with you, kind of about where our position, and even to our audience, kind of where our position is on that. And if we need to flesh that out more, we totally can.
Yeah.
But our primary emphasis today is unity.
Yeah.
Man, I am so eager to have you on, Josh. Like, this is awesome. When we first had the email back and forth that you agreed to be on, I was pumped because I was like, this is incredible. Like, we finally get to model coffee and cream in a real world situation.
Yeah, man.
We get to have people who disagree with each other, go back and forth on these secondary and tertiary issues, and kind of just talk about it, what it means for our lives today and how it relates to the gospel. And man, I am so eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit and what that looks like for us today as Christians. And so, Josh, I kind of want to give the floor to you and kind of talk through this statement on social justice. Kind of people didn't really see the statement coming, and it kind of just dropped in the middle of the internet, and people just kind of had to figure out kind of what was going on. I'm sure there was a lot of behind the scenes work to get this going, and a lot of people who had to sign it and get approval for it. I'm sure that was a very long process. So I kind of want to take a step back, and I want to go through your thought process behind the statement itself, and I want to specifically hit on, what were some of the things that you were seeing that caused alarm for you? You can go back as far as you can in your memory for things that first started to give you red flags about the issue of social justice, and then kind of lead us into how the statement came about. I'm sure that was a process in and of itself, trying to get all those men together in the same room. But just kind of go through that, and give the floor to you, man.
Yeah. So really it just came down to several layers of concern. So over the past number of years, I've been just trying to discern, trying to see. I couldn't really put my finger on it, but something just didn't seem right. That, it seemed like there was some sort of an agenda, or at least some methods that were being employed out of a certain position theologically that just did not seem like it was setting well with me, but I really didn't understand what it was. I couldn't really track it. I didn't really have a good handle on it, if that makes sense. So I'm listening to sermons at conferences, reading books, reading articles, and I'm just starting to see things and listen to things that sound, a bit off, on the points. And so Vodi Balkum was actually in town, and he was going to be speaking at our church. We were having a meal in our home, and for about 3 hours, sitting at my supper table, Vodi was just driving home the issues. and I would ask a question for explanation or clarification on what I was sensing, and then he would connect those dots, those puzzle pieces that were missing for me. He was just pulling back the veil, so to speak, so that I could see it clearly, and then it all just really made sense to me. And really, I think the breakdown it wasn't all just racism stuff. It wasn't all just built upon systemic racism. It was a whole broad picture of the victim mentality. And, it wasn't that we were throwing around the whole Marxist language at the table, but there was a whole lot of emphasis that was placed upon, if you play that victim card, whether you're talking about issues of ethnicity, or whether you're talking about issues related to discrimination of women, or whatever it might be, that there's almost a sense of, a charge of energy that you get. There's a natural support that you get in our culture today as a result of that. And so we started talking and hashing all of that out. There were some things that I would put out on the table that maybe weren't exactly correct, and then he was helping me see some of my misunderstandings, at least in some of those areas. Sure. We agreed on a lot of things. But as we had that conversation, really, I would say that that's where it started, the light really came on for me a couple of years ago. And then fast forward over those 2 years, I've been, in a heightened way, you might say, I've been paying close attention to what's being put out on social media, what's being said in conferences, what's being published on certain blog sites, and that type of thing. And so then we're leading up to the Martin Luther King 50 conference, the MLK 50 conference, which was a joint endeavor from the ERLC and the Gospel Coalition.
Sure.
And I was really just astounded by what I was seeing played out on an evangelical stage at a conference. You come together with the idea of unity, but then you have a man who's invited to come and stand on the platform and give a spoken word poem titled Dear Mike Brown. And if I'm just completely honest and transparent, I don't believe that was in any way, shape, form, or fashion driving at unity. The charge of emotion, the whole idea was it was driving, in a sense, it was just adding fuel to the fire of the division there.
Sure.
And I really honestly don't believe it was a balanced approach. I mean, you have in that very poem, you have him talking about rest in peace, and all this other stuff. And you're talking about a man who lived a thug life. So if we're honest about an individual who lived a life of thuggery, and then whether or not, I don't want to wade into the whole controversy on whether or not it was just or whether it was unjust as far as his killing is concerned. But here's the point. The point is, I would just point back at what Vody wrote in his article that was actually on the Gospel Coalition's website. It crashed the Gospel Coalition's website. And Vody's theme throughout that article was centered on the idea that he reaped what he sowed. Well, he did reap what he sowed. If you live a life of sin and degradation and thuggery, then whether or not it was just or unjust, you're probably going to end up in a bad place before it's all said and done. And so that's the big struggle there. And so when I'm watching that play out, and then in that very poem, he actually slaps Vody across the face, but he didn't call his name. And so I'm just watching all of this, and then I'm listening to how they're treating Martin Luther King Jr. And you know what? I have great respect for what MLK did in the civil rights movement. I think the civil rights movement was broken, if I'm honest. But the civil rights movement at least accomplished some really good things. And MLK accomplished some really, really good things. But if we're really honest, if you read a man's theology by what he actually penned, then the only person that had the audacity to question the validity of his salvation was John Piper in the very final sermon. And so I just feel like it wasn't a balanced treatment of MLK. And then if you're talking about unity, I feel like it certainly wasn't a balanced treatment there. And so they're driving an agenda and they're driving an ideology of systemic racism that's alive and well, not only in the culture, but in evangelicalism. And then they're also driving the ideology that white supremacy is alive and well, not just in the culture, but within evangelicalism. And so that really was the dividing point for me. That was the dividing line. That was the issue where it was like I just picked up the phone and started calling friends and said, look, I'm really uncomfortable with what I'm seeing and where we're headed within the evangelical culture. So can we pray? Can we talk? And then eventually we ended up deciding, let's figure out a way to get into a room together with about 14, 15, 20 men, and let's try to work hard at understanding what's going on. So that's really the background, if you will.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. No, I think that's super helpful to kind of get a better understanding of that. And the poem you're referring to is from Preston Perry, whom we're both very big fans of.
Yeah, very much so.
Dear Michael Brown, his wife Jackie Hill Perry is also very fantastic. So we'll link to that in the show notes so you guys can take a listen to that. So kind of moving on to a couple other interviews you did with Andrew Rapport at Striving for Eternity Ministries, an interview we did with Dead Man's Podcast, and also with Iron Sharpens Iron. You stated that social justice is the greatest threat to the church. And I think John MacArthur has also echoed this as well. The problem, I think the first main concern that Matt and I had, especially with the social justice statement, is that social justice wasn't defined in the statement itself. I know that you might have gotten to some themes that you were seeing in the social justice movement in terms of like white privilege, racism, complementarianism, those types of things. Intersectionality was mentioned in the first affirmation and denial. But I think something that was very lacking for us was a concrete definition of social justice. And I think that that's part of the confusion. Mm-hmm. And I will rightly say on all sides there's confusion around the term social justice. Mm-hmm. And there have been several articles, I'll link to one from Joe Carter talking about social justice. There have been several from other ones as well I'll link to, talking about and trying to define social justice for us. But that was one of the things that we wanted to ask you was, would you be willing to give us a definition of social justice?
Yeah. Well, first of all, your critique is actually well taken and received. Look, here's the point. You ask if it was intentional or if it wasn't intentional for us to just kind of breeze past a robust definition of social justice. And in many ways, it was intentional. Now, I will say that I did put my voice out amongst the group and state that I thought that it would be helpful to have a definition, a working definition. Yeah. But there was this idea that because social justice in and of itself is so fluid and it's so young in many ways, not young in the sense of I think it has a long history, but just the modern approach of social justice. And so, and there's so many different arms, and I really believe that there are three different layers to the modern social justice movement. But before I try to work and drive at a definition for you, just let me say that when I say that I don't, if I were to say to you, I reject the idea of systemic racism that's alive and well within our culture, but specifically evangelicalism. Let me be very clear about that. Sure. I think that there's a such thing as personal racism that's very much alive and well in our culture. And I think that there's a such thing as personal racism that's very much alive and well within pockets of evangelicalism. So therefore, on that very note, there's no system, whether it's the system of American culture or the system of evangelicalism, that's 100% pure and just and righteous, okay? Mm-hmm. So every system is broken because it's full of sinful people, depraved individuals. And so from the very outset, I want to be very clear that I think that there is a such thing as racism. I do think that racism is a problem in our culture. I just don't buy into the idea that there is a system that has really collaborated together to say, hey, let's hold back our black brothers and sisters from achieving all that they could possibly achieve for the glory of God, or let's hold back women from flourishing and using all of their gifts for the glory of God. So that idea of systemic racism or systemic oppression or discrimination, I just completely reject that. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that, do you have any definition of social justice that you can give us? I know you talked about the 3 layers, and I think you've even referred to it as a train car, so to speak. Would you be able to provide us with maybe with a little bit more of a definition of social justice?
Yeah. So I think if you were just to think about social justice as a concept in and of itself, the definition I would say really just flows out of an agenda that's rooted in politics rather than theology. And so I would say that the modern social justice movement is really made up of 3 different layers, you might say, or 3 different boxcars, if you're going to use the train analogy. And so the idea of the oppression of people of color, or really the emphasis hasn't really been people of color, if we're honest. It's been centered primarily on black people. So the oppression of people of color or black people, the oppression of women, and then here's one that they don't really want to include under the banner of social justice, but really, if we're honest, we must do it simply because of the fact that the LGBT Christianity group, which I reject as a category altogether, a valid category, biblical category, but they're using the platform of social justice to beat on the door and say, hey, listen, you're giving them attention, and they want their voices to be heard, whether it be Me Too or We Too or systemic racism or whatever it might be. And so the LGBT Christian group, they're shouting and they're knocking on the doors and they're banging on the gate saying, hey, we want our voices to be heard too. We can marry legally in our culture today. You reject that. You prevent us from having church membership within your churches, and we want to be heard. This is unjust. And so under that banner of social justice, you have those 3 boxcars, okay? And so what we're seeing is really, you could say that in some ways, and I wouldn't say that it's, it's a perfect representation of it, but there is this idea of neo-Marxism. So the whole Gramsci approach to dividing a culture into race, class, and gender, and then spotlighting the oppressed or those who are discriminated against, and then trying to create this movement of sympathy, which is very lucrative, very powerful. But keep in mind, the ones who drive that ship, they're in complete control. And so they claim that they want unity, but then we have a conference like MLK 50 where there wasn't a whole lot of unity there. Now, keep in mind, I didn't do a whole lot of statistical evaluation of that, but at the Southern Baptist Convention in Dallas this past June, there was a few guys that wanted to talk to me. We graduated from seminary together. They wanted to try to confront me on my positions, and we had a good, honest conversation. And so up walks this black brother. And so I said, man, I've never met you before in my life, but I just want to ask you a simple question. And so I painted the scene for him regarding MLK 50, and he's just listening. And I said, do you believe that was helpful or harmful to the division among ethnicities within our culture today, specifically evangelicalism? And he said it was a train wreck. I mean, the first words out of his mouth was, it was not helpful at all. And so then he went on to explain. Now, that was the first time that I'd ever met this man. Now, I have black brothers and I have others within our own church context that I've had similar conversations with, and they found it very harmful and not helpful. And so, once again, I mean, I don't have like a whole list of stats to throw out before you, but what I'm sensing and what I'm seeing is that there's one side that's being the side that people are seeing and hearing. But even within this social justice conversation, there's not been a whole lot of conversation going on. There's been a whole lot of one-sided talk. There was one-sided talk leading up to this juncture. Once the statement rolls out, there's been a one-sided talk really up to this very moment. So you have media agencies or individuals within evangelicalism and beyond, news media types, that have been reaching out to the other side to get what their opinion is. Well, keep in mind, they've been talking for a whole long time now. They've been talking for years. Mm-hmm. But now here we are at this juncture, and they don't want to hear what we have to say, like you guys. They don't want to sit down with coffee and open the Bible and let's put our fingers on chapter and verse. Let's have a theological conversation, not just about what you believe or the methods that you support or what I believe, let's just really just bring this thing to the scriptures. And so, once again, I've heard a lot of people, from Tim Keller to Russell Moore to others, who have stated that it's not about what they said. This is what Keller said, which I found to be quite intriguing. It's not about what they said, it's about what they're trying to do with the statement. Well, I found that quite interesting, because he's not really asked us what we're trying to do with the statement. And then Russell Moore, early October, just a couple of weeks ago, he was interviewed by Lauren Green from Fox. And in that very conversation, he said, really what the social justice statement is about race. Really? The interesting thing is we have like a whole lot of articles, like 14 articles, and there's only 2 that touch on race. So there's an awful lot more that we're interested in talking about beyond just race. But then he went on and actually stated this in the audacity, which is interesting because, keep in mind, although I completely disagree with Russell Moore on this issue, I have had a lot of love and respect for him through the years. He was actually my professor at Southern Seminary.
Yeah.
But he actually went on to align us with the spirit of Jim Crow. Now, I'm just going to be transparent as I could possibly be. There's not one man that sat in that room with us in Dallas that I would say is driving at this thing from the spirit of Jim Crow. That's the farthest thing from us. So I found that to be a bit slanderous and certainly unhelpful. I think that we can have a profitable conversation. And so I'm interested in engaging with you guys and others as well. But I find it unhelpful, unprofitable to just throw rocks across the fence at one another. Okay, so that's an issue.
Absolutely, yeah. And just to state it clear, we don't think y'all are racists.
No.
We're not saying that. We've never believed that. We have always tried, I've strived to do, is to give people the benefit of the doubt when it comes to this kind of stuff. I might have had a knee-jerk reaction at first, but it's like, think about it. No, these are brothers in Christ.
Yeah, absolutely.
These are faithful. These are
And
faithful ministers in
the
Christ.
same thing with us.
Yeah.
The very reason that we haven't called named names in the statement, like in the introduction, when we're talking about people, watchmen on the wall, or people that that have been long trusted voices that we disagree with, the reason that we've chosen not to name names is because we don't believe that those individuals have actually crossed the line of heresy. We believe that heresy is a technical term, and it should be used and employed only in the cases, at which point someone adds to or subtracts from the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we believe that the overwhelming majority of the people within this framework of conversation on social justice are our brothers and sisters in Christ. We simply disagree with them, and we disagree with them unashamedly on these very issues.
Absolutely. And I'll link to the Russell Moore interview with Lauren Green. I thought it was a good interview. I didn't get the same vibe that you did from it, but I think we might have been listening from different ears. That's totally fine. And I'll link to Tim Keller's speech as well, where he talked about speech act theory.
When we're doing biblical exegesis, we don't say, what does this mean to you, or what does it mean to me? We need to find out what he actually meant, right?
Yeah, and at that point, we need to have him in the conversation and have him in the room with us. So,
Russell Moore.
Yeah, paging Russell Moore. Let's go.
Hop on.
So I kind of want to fall back a little bit, because I do want to ask about the specifics of why you didn't name anybody, because you have named people in this interview already, but there weren't people specifically named in the statement itself. But I want to kind of go back, just step back a little bit. I want to be sure we're all working from the same terms here. So social justice, from your perspective, is an agenda driven by politics over theology that has the train of racism, systemic racism, has radical feminism, and has the LGBT Christians as the plank in it. Am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah, I think so. I think that we do come to a place within this political movement. I think politics drives it. I think you very soon, within the evangelical conversation at least, you get to theology. But I think it's a problem when your orthopraxy or orthopraxy is actually driving your orthodoxy, if that makes any sense. So I think your orthodoxy and your orthopraxy must be aligned together, and so your theology must drive your practice, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So then now let's define the most important term I think we're going to talk about here is biblical justice.
Yeah.
How would you define? If you got a Bible, let's go point verse and point it. How would you define biblical justice for us, and how does it differ from social justice from what you're saying?
Yeah, so I think that biblical justice is really just this understanding of you have to start with God, right? So I would say that biblical justice begins with God. So we have a just God, all right? Yeah. So our God is just. He is the just and the justifier of those who believe. And so I would say that true justice, and I agree, I think that we need to kind of lose the idea of social justice. Let's just talk about justice. So I think that justice flows from God, and then I think that as a result of us seeing God who is just, then we look at, say, Romans 13, or we look at other passages of Scripture, and we see government established to uphold that justice, but where does it originate from? It originates with God, right? Mm-hmm. And I would say that anytime that we're told to do justice or to live justly, I think that that's, once again, just flowing out of the heart of the gospel. So how do we do that? Well, I think, first of all, you have to have justice and righteousness connected. And so I think that how do we know what righteousness is? Well, I think we look to the second person of the Godhead. I think we look to Jesus Christ. And I think that we receive by faith his imputed righteousness. And so then flowing out of, and this is all through the gospel. And so then flowing out of the gospel is this just life that is really connected to righteousness that's lived out. So you're living out the gospel, and there's righteousness that's put on display, and there's justice that's that you're committed to. And so that goes to, first of all, you submit to God, and then you submit to government. And then when government tells you to disobey God, then you say, well, then I must obey God and not man. And so that's just a simple, brief explanation as to where justice originates from. You don't just get it. You don't just grab it. It's not somehow just some abstract understanding. Yeah. Justice comes from God himself.
Yeah, I think we would both agree on that definition of biblical justice.
Absolutely.
I want to focus in a little bit on this because we read the definition, and we've asked this question several times with other guests or whatnot. We've asked this question to each other, but one of the biggest questions we have about that is how does that play out in the conversation and dealing with the sin of racism? Because we all agree here that racism is a sin and that the church is called to address sin in multiple ways. And so what I feel that is happening amongst the culture, American culture specifically, is that people are drawn to social justice because they don't see biblical justice as, I'm putting this in air quotes for those that are listening, as the way to address racism. Mm-hmm. And so just for practical application, how does biblical justice, or what is biblical justice like in addressing racial issues?
That's a very good question. Let's go to 1 Corinthians, and let's just take Paul's letter to the church in Corinth. Let's just talk about that. Okay, so you have
one of my favorite books, by the way.
So you have a church that's just riddled with sin, right? I mean, you have a man who's sleeping with his stepmom. Yeah. You have all sorts of sinful issues. And the interesting thing is, if you have a high view of church membership like we do, you would say, if you're counseling someone, look, when there's problems that arise within the church, you don't just go and say, hey, look, there's a church down the road that's a lot more healthy than this one. And it's, you won't have to do the hard work of confrontation of sin. Just pack up your bags and go over there and join that church. Paul doesn't say that. He doesn't say, try to make it across the line into Ephesus or someplace else and join that church. No, he says, you handle your sin here. You fix your problems here. So just a simple answer about how biblical justice plays out in the life of a believer to confront personal racism would be church discipline. So if someone is a professing brother within the context of the church, so keep in mind, if we're talking about the framework of evangelicalism, I hope we're not talking about just the universal church at large. We're going to have to drive to the local church, right? And so the issue would be, you start with the confrontation. Matthew chapter 18, if your brother sins against you, you go to him and him alone. And if he repents, you've gained your brother. If he chooses not to repent, then you take 2 or 3 witnesses with you. If he chooses not to hear the charge in the presence of the witnesses that establish this charge, then at that point you would need to tell it to the church. If he chooses not to hear the church, then you treat him as a publican and a tax collector. So the whole point is you put him outside of the church. So there's a biblical methodology to work towards confrontation of sin. And I think that when we hear voices within mainstream evangelicalism today that are, within the social justice framework at least, that are championing the idea of, well, if you believe that the white church that you're a member of, keep in mind, air quotes, white church that you're a member of, is not approaching things regarding social justice the way that you think, then just leave. Let's just do a mass exodus and just leave the white church behind. I think that that's very unhelpful. I think that we need to dig into the real messiness of church life and deal with sin and confront it and then bury it and then move on in unity. Maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace, Ephesians 4. And that word maintain, it literally has in mind the idea of striving together and working towards the goal of unity. And you read that at the very outset of this podcast.
Absolutely. And I would actually say I agree with you on that practice of church discipline when dealing with racial issues within the church, and that be a practice with all sins, not just racial sins, but with all sins.
Absolutely.
All right, that was part 1 of our 2-part episode with Pastor Josh Buice. It's been a really great conversation so far. So tune in next week when we're going to drop part 2. We want to give a couple shout outs to our sponsors. Crossway, check them out at crossway.org for all your gospel-centered resources. Go to Switch Coffee at switchcoffee.co. Use our promo code Coffee and Cream to get 10% off your next order. And be sure to check out JM Films at jmfilms.com for video marketing that gets results. Make sure you guys go like us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please leave us a 5-star review on iTunes if you really enjoyed this episode. We would love to hear from you guys. It really helps get us up in the ratings, so make sure you guys go check us out there. We want to give a huge shout out to our audio engineer, David Butler, who helped bring this episode together despite the technical difficulties. And we want to thank our producer, Nick Francis, for all the work he put into this episode as well. So guys, we will see you again next week for part 2 of our interview with Pastor Josh Buice.